Man of Steel opens in the United States later this week. Depending on when you're watching this episode of The Big Picture, I'll very likely have already seen it, but as of this recording, I have not. Consider my fingers crossed. Actually, consider a lot of people's fingers crossed. As befits him, this new incarnation of Superman is carrying a lot of weight on its shoulders, not only undertaking the somehow necessary task of making the most towering figure in the currently biggest genre in all of popular culture cool again, but also helping Warner Bros. DC Comics movie adaptations finally move out of the Gotham City ghetto, stop embarrassing themselves, and just generally get their act together. I mean, seriously, just the fact that the Avengers got to movie theaters before the Justice League is like if Kiss had gotten into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ahead of the Beatles. But perhaps the most difficult task at hand for Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan's mega-hyped reworking of the seminal superhero will finally be getting the live-action movie arm of the Superman franchise out from under the shadow of the original Richard Donner film. A classic so revered it remains for many the yardstick by which the entire genre is still judged, and the standard Superman in particular can't just seem to escape. It was the first time a superhero story had been treated the lavish, big-star Hollywood spectacle, even if there wouldn't be another similar success until 1989's Batman, and the genre wouldn't fully come to dominate theaters until 1-2-3 punch of Blade, X-Men, and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man at the turn of the millennium. I don't know that there's been a movie adaptation of anything that was already popular that loomed so large and had such a lasting effect over its original material. Christopher Reeve is the Superman by which all others will forever be judged. Most music associated with the character can't help but try and sound like John Williams' score, and the new to that film takes on the mythos like Superman's shield being a Krypton family crest, the new agey crystal Krypton, Jor-El's holographic image hanging around the Fortress of Solitude, and Clark Kent starting his career as an adult, rather than being Superboy first, have wormed their way into countless subsequent versions of the character, for better or for worse. This is why I partially don't mind that Man of Steel is choosing to tell the second or third most widely known origin story on the planet again, since it's probably necessary to start completely from scratch and make sure every piece of the new Superman is a notably distinct thing from its famous doppelganger in the original. I mean, I'll still mind if they somehow manage to f*** it up. The Nolan brothers and David Goyer were in charge of the story after all, and with those guys in comic book movies you either get yeah or that's too bad. But I understand the necessity of trying to change it up all the same. But despite, or indeed because, of how culturally omnipresent it is, the actual merits of the Donner-Reeves Superman are often given a secondary consideration to the magnitude of its place in the cultural pantheon. I mean, that it's a classic is undisputed, but does it hold up? Is it still that good? Was it ever that good? Well, hell yeah, I think so. This is a movie I revisit pretty frequently, and while it's definitely not perfect either as an adaptation of Superman or just as a movie in and of itself, despite all that and its problematic ubiquity, this remains just a flat-out really good movie. And it's easy to see why the franchise has been falling short of it ever since. It doesn't really require much more endorsement beyond being a really well-made, well-acted, well-directed fantasy adventure, but it's particularly spectacular in the context of its time. No one had ever even attempted to do this before. Sure, there had been fanciful movies and big effects-driven spectacles and even movies based on comics before, but no one had ever tried to take the unique visual and storytelling tropes of the superhero to the big screen in a respectable, full-scale production. Where were they even supposed to start? Should it be a comedy, a children's film, some kind of sci-fi affected drama? Keep in mind, even though everyone knew Superman and DC Comics was having a very profitable tail end of the Silver Age, most of the people making decisions on this film would have been more familiar with the Golden Age Superman, whose adventures often had more in common with lighthearted children's stories or cartoon slapstick than the action-heavy feel modern comic fans were more familiar with. Hell, when Richard Donner signed on to the project, he found that the screenplay they were using, and they were shooting Superman and Superman 2 together at the same time, too, had become a campy, jokey mess that he opted to throw out and start over from scratch. They gave Marlon Brando what was at the time one of the biggest paydays in Hollywood history for a cameo as Jor-El, and then had to deal with his strange initial insistence that he be allowed to play the part either as a talking bagel or an animated suitcase. No, really, that he wanted to do that. You can look that up. And yet, somehow, it all comes together. I think a big part of the formula is that Donner managed to find, as the first guy to attempt this, I remind you, a kind of perfect balance between movie realism and comic book fantasy, finding parallels between must-film iconic Superman moments and established familiar cinematic styles. The Krypton stuff is trippy 70s sci-fi, the Smallville scenes are straight out of John Ford meets Norman Rockwell American pastoral playbook, the big action set pieces play out like the disaster movies so popular at the time, the romance with Lois Lane and the Daily Planet scenes are rapid-fire banter a la the neo-screwball adult comedies of Woody Allen and Robert Altman, and Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor seems like he was expecting to fight James Bond instead. The movie isn't out to prove that Superman is realistic, it's out to prove that he belongs in the movies. Oh, and speaking of Gene Hackman, I know a lot of people like to hate on this version of Lex Luthor, and apart from the dopey Can You Read my mind stuff with Lois, it's probably the weaker part of the movie, but Hackman is a lot of fun in the part, and honestly the ridiculous new calf of California so my worthless real estate becomes valuable waterfront property villain plan is a thoroughly modern version of the crazy master scheme stuff associated with Lex Luthor in the Gold and Silver Ages before DC retconned him into just another nyahaha, I'm rich and I'm evil businessman guy from the 80s. But what really puts it over the edge is how profoundly it manages to get a character as difficult as Superman. In a way, flawed, broken anti-heroes like Batman, Dirty Harry, Wolverine, whoever are easier to get right because they give you more layers to work with. But Superman is supposed to be a genuine icon of our potential for ultimate good realized, and that kind of character, one who's already attained complete uncomplicated goodness to the extent that the development is all about the other characters reacting to him being the real thing, is really hard to do. This movie pulls it off, Captain America did it, I guess Jesus movies do it too, but that's a whole other thing. My point is, this movie got Superman in a way that almost no one has managed to since, and while I'm looking forward to Man of Steel, whether or not it will be yet another admirable try that misses the point and the mark remains to be seen. We'll find out soon enough, but if it doesn't, well, there's always still this one. And I guess Avengers 2 in a couple years. So, Man of Steel banked enough money over the weekend to feed and or purchase several impoverished small countries, surprising absolutely no one given that superhero movies are the most popular genre on the planet right now and Superman is the most well-known character in that particular genre and has been for about 75 years and counting. Either way, with the film now branded a bona fide hit with or without its less than stellar reviews, the question now immediately becomes what next? After all, the entire production history of this movie is also quite openly the production history of how Warner Brothers planned to build its own answer to Marvel's ultra-successful Avengers project. Hell, when I went to see it, damn near the entire audience sat through the credits only to groan loudly when it turned out there wasn't any teaser on the end like they've gotten used to seeing in these things. But of course, there never was going to be one. The main thing that Warner Brothers has always been surprisingly open about regarding their plans for the DC Universe movies is that they don't have any plans for the DC Universe movies. They had a plan, supposedly, that was going to follow off of Green Lantern, but then Green Lantern turned out to be so they had to start all over again. They've pretty much just been waiting to see what kind of numbers Man of Steel would do, and now that we know those numbers are big, you can assume the serious planning phase stuff started sometime yesterday morning. So yeah, any kind of speculation at this point would be just that, speculation. This isn't like Thor or Captain America where you could freeze frame through the movie and find all kinds of clues about who or what was going to happen in later people's movies. Outside of the LexCorp building and the Wayne logo on that satellite, the only world Man of Steel appears interested in building was its own. Which, by the way, I have exactly zero issue with. There's no law that said every damn superhero movie needs to follow Marvel's template just because it's been successful. If Warner Brothers wants to borrow from the Avengers playbook, they should borrow the self-assured confidence in the material, not the business strategy. What has my curiosity piqued is that I'm not entirely sure there's a lot of places for Man of Steel to actually go as a franchise, even strictly on its own terms. And I'm not just saying that because I thought the film was good, but not really that good. What I mean is, the more I think about the movie, the more it feels like it would be somewhat difficult to find a compelling place for it to go after this. I know I put the warning up at the beginning, but just in case, this would be where the big, huge, major spoilers go, folks, so last chance to back out. Okay, let's get right to the nitty-gritty. At the climax of Man of Steel, General Zod forces Superman into a confrontation wherein the only way Superman can prevent him from straight-up murdering a random family of four is to use lethal force himself, which he does. That's our big ending. Superman kills General Zod with his bare hands. Now, this scene bugs the hell out of me on a lot of levels. Yeah, I'm gonna be that guy. Superman shouldn't kill people. He just shouldn't. And I'm not buying the only possible option hand-wave in this particular scenario. He's Superman. He can do anything. That's one of the main points. No, scratch that. That's really kind of the only point to this character. Yes, realistically, I understand that the real reason most superheroes were written with a do-not-kill policy is so that popular bad guys can keep coming back month after month, and those same concerns aren't necessarily valid for the more limited run of a live-action movie franchise, but in every medium, it's always made sense for Superman. And yeah, I know in the movie he freaked out about killing Zod, but when you think about it, even that was kind of a weird moment because they'd never bothered to establish earlier that this version of Superman doesn't kill his enemies. Like, I get the idea of the scene in the context of this movie is that killing someone with his super strength is the literal manifestation of everything he'd always been afraid of about himself, and obviously I can appreciate the symbolic value in Superman breaking one of the cardinal don't rules, but it's kind of odd that they never specify that this is part of his code anywhere beforehand, especially since it doesn't look like he's been holding back all that much elsewhere in the movie. Here's the thing, if we've now already established that this Superman is willing to kill his enemies to save the lives of others, well, alright, but doesn't that kind of suck the suspense out of every potential Superman-level threat that could turn up in the future now that this particular horse has left the barn? I mean, most of the stuff Lex Luthor tends to cook up is going to result in the deaths of a lot more than 4 people. Ditto guys like Brainiac or Parasite, hell, Darkseid, anybody? So what exactly is going to be the excuse for why he doesn't just show up in Act 2 of every sequel and go, yeah, this evil plot of yours is gonna kill people, so you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. I mean, other than Kryptonite. But even beyond that one issue that, let's be honest, they can probably write their way out of easily enough, I'm not really able to summon all that much interest in spending any more time in the Man of Steel universe in general, even though I overall didn't hate the movie. Oh, I'm sure I'll come around on it if and when we start hearing about the potentially interesting things in the work, and yes, in case you're wondering, I recognize that I'm being very much part of the problem with modern blockbusters by talking about sequel fatigue not even a week after the movie opened, but right now that's where I'm at. I didn't dislike this movie, but I also didn't really get swept up in it beyond a purely superficial sensory level, and a big part of the reason why is that it's so relentlessly dour and downbeat and funereal in tone. I'm just not in love with mopey, dreary Superman, so I'm not exactly champing at the bit to meet the mopey, dreary version of Supergirl, mopey, dreary Batman, mopey, dreary Wonder Woman, mopey, dreary, Martian Manhunter, or whoever else might be turning up to help Kal-El sulk through the sequels. But then again, Man of Steel's final moments do provide the first appearance of the nerdy reporter version of Clark Kent, which could very easily be taken as an indicator that this is all very deliberate and they're looking to have him lighten up as the series goes on. So, okay, color me sort of hopeful. Still not officially excited, but hopeful. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.